address, you can come forward right now. Okay, hearing none. Counselor, I have a question about the agenda. We are going to take the first public hearing item, and we'd like to table that. Does that require a change to the agenda, or can we table that when we get to it?
You can table that when you get to it.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as it appears?
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. That approves the minutes. We now will invite our wonderful auditors to come forward and present to us. Andy's going to
We'll
introduce.
introduce them. Our auditors are here from Rushton and Company to present the findings from the audit from fiscal year 2019-2020 that ended June of 2020. So Julie George is going to come and explain it to you. And Kelly is also here. Kelly Palmer is also here to help.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. It's good to see you this evening. I first would like to say thank you to Mayor and Council for engaging Rushton to perform the audit for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2020. And I would like to also thank your town staff, Sandy, Brandon, everyone that we work with at the town of Tyrone is very attentive to our request, and we could not do what we do without them. So I just want to make sure that, that you all know that they help us in every way they can, get us things timely, are attentive to our needs, and that we greatly appreciate that. And as a result, the audit for the town of Tyrone does go very smooth. I want to start by just letting you know what you have in front of you. Got a 3-page letter. You have an audit presentation. Brandon is also presenting the PowerPoint on screen. And then you have the actual annual financial report bound. So we're pretty much going to focus on the presentation today, but there will be some reference to pages within the annual financial report. But I wanted to begin with this letter. This is a letter of required communications that we need to make to governance. And it is routine. It is specific to the town of Tyrone, but when I say routine, it is very similar to what you saw last year. And just to point out a few important things, one, there were no new accounting policies adopted during the year. So the accounting policies that you find in the FY20 report are unchanged over prior year. And I also wanted to point out that we did not encounter any difficulties in dealing with management. If we did encounter difficulties, we would let you know. But as I said, it's smooth. They're very cooperative and attentive to our needs. We also did not have any disagreements with management about any financial accounting or reporting matters. We do, of course, as part of our audit, propose adjustments when things come to our attention, and those, of course, are provided to finance. They've made all those entries, and any material entries, were made and are accounted for in the financial report. And we do also obtain representations from management. So there's multiple representations from management because, the financial report that we're about to go through is management's responsibility. So they, are supposed to make us aware of certain accounting transactions and provide us all minutes and documentations that we ask for because, we're not here every day of the year and they are. So it does address that we do obtain certain representations. So I'll start in the audit presentation binder. And this first slide mentions the audit opinion. And that's on pages 1 through 3 in the bound report. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, the financial statements are the responsibility of the town's management. And that is clearly stated on page 1 of this report. And then it also mentions the auditor's responsibility. Well, our responsibility is to express an opinion on whether or not these financial statements are fairly presented. And we audit the town's financial statements in accordance with auditing standards generally accepted in the United States of America, and also in accordance with government auditing standards, which is issued by the Comptroller General. Your opinions at the very bottom of page 1, that is an unmodified opinion. That means that we did not feel a need to modify the opinion on the financial statements. That's also known as a clean opinion. That means based on our opinion, we think the financial statements do fairly present in all material respects the financial position of the town and the respective changes in financial position of the town for the year ended June 30, 2020. So that is definitely the type of opinion that you want to have. You want to have a clean opinion because that lets you know an independent third party, being Rushton, has audited these financial statements, and we do believe that they are presented fairly in all material respects. Moving on to the next slide, we've got the government-wide statements. These statements are on pages 4, 5, and 6. These statements present information to the reader regarding the town as a whole. That means everything about the town of Tyrone is included in these statements. So not only do we have your general fund and your SPLOST fund and your narcotics in here, we also have your sewer and your sanitation. And we call these government-wide statements for that reason. So there's 2 financial statements here. On pages 4 and 5, we have the statement of net position. That would be similar to a balance sheet in the private sector, if you're familiar with that terminology. Basically, it details the assets of the town, the liabilities of the town, and ends in what the town's net position is. And you'll notice on page 5, the total ending net position of the town as of June 30, 2020 was $23 million. Following on page 6, we have statement of activities. That would be, it is very different because this is government accounting, but it would be similar to, say, a profit and loss statement in the private sector, which means this is where we see your revenues and your expenses. And notice that your format is a little different in that your expenses are in that first column on the left, and we have those by function. So we look at government expenses based on whether it's general government, judicial, public safety, culture, and rec. And then we take program revenues. Program revenues are those that are specific to those functions, and we list those up top under operating grants and contributions, capital grants and contributions, and charges for services. At the bottom of the statement, we have general revenues. That's where you're going to find your property taxes, your sales taxes, just your general revenues that are for not a specific public works project or a specific recreation fee, but that go to general revenues for operating the town. And the business type activities, that is going to be your sewer and sanitation. And we'll talk about those a little later in more detail. But basically, this is the results of operations. This is the revenues that came in and the expenses that were paid out. And you'll note that there was an increase in total net position of $3.3 million over the prior year. And that's what brought our net position up to the $23 million. On the next slide, you'll see the net position over the last 5 years. And we do have, as you see, the $3 million increase. And we also have some notes here explaining some of the more significant reasons for increases and decreases over time. And one thing that we saw this year in 2020 was that there was an increase in capital contributions. So there was capital contribution for the sewer system expansion, but also some infrastructure that was contributed to the town. And GASB does consider those assets, and assets do increase your net position. Okay, the general fund obviously is the primary operating fund for the city. So we definitely want to spend some time there. So we're gonna flip over, starting on page 54, and take a look at the general fund statements. This is probably more of what you look at on a monthly basis, information you get from the finance department, because this is, you know, the bulk of basically running the government outside of SPLOST projects and your sewer system. So if we look at your revenues, page 54 through 59 is the general fund, but we're gonna look at revenues on page 55. And those did increase over prior year, 3.5%. And we do break down on this slide some of the more significant changes. And sales tax decreased, but you will see that other taxes, franchise tax, property taxes, and insurance premium tax increased. And that's what gets us up to that 180 and 3.5% over prior year. Expenditures increased, $2.5 million. That's a 52% increase. And I know that sounds huge, but this is a general fund statement, so that means the money that you spend in FY20 on this building is in there. So that looks like a big number, I know, but at the fund level, we are deducting that capital outlay. At the government-wide level, we're not deducting that capital outlay, we're recognizing that building as an asset. But here, because it's on a modified accrual basis, we are deducting it. So that's why you see that big increase in general government. Public safety and public works and culture and rec all decreased. Housing and development increased, and then debt service increased. And again, that is that we did have some debt service for the building. Looking at your fund balance, I know that's something that most of the time mayor and council are very interested in. You do have 11.69 months at the end of FY20. It is decreased over last year, of course, based on the money that was spent, but that is a very healthy fund balance. So I think that's a very positive place to be. And that's unassigned. That means that money is not restricted or committed to be spent on anything. It is unassigned. Next slide, we've got a line graph just showing a 5-year trend of revenues and expenses. And you will see that each year revenues do increase. So that's good that revenues are going up. And expenses were staying under there until this year. But again, that's the building. And I would say for the most part, everything else remained steady. And without the building, you would have continued to see sort of a steady green line there. Any questions about the general fund? I know that's going to look a little different than usual, but again, having such a large capital outlay in the general fund this year, it's going to, you know, cause those expenses to go up. But we are familiar with what that is, but I just wanted to bring to your attention when you see that spike in that green line, it is primarily that large capital outlay, which you did have other financing sources from the debt proceeds, but that's not considered a revenue. It's considered another financing source. So that's why it's not included in the blue line on the graph. Okay, we'll move on to the sewer fund. That is on page 64 and 66. I will say, you know, the general fund statements go all the way through page 59. So if you're interested in the detail, there's much more detail, and you can actually see on page 57, if you looked at general government, you will see that the capital outlay was a $3.4 million total. So that shows you how those specifically went up. And it has a comparative to prior year and also has comparative to the budget. Moving on to page 64, we'll take a look at the sewer fund. Sewer fund operating revenue did increase about 10%, and operating expenses actually decreased. And I did detail a few examples on the slide of what was up and what was down. And the largest thing was that in the prior year, there was some cost associated with inspection and mapping of the sewer system, and we didn't have that this year. So the sewer system did see a decrease in expenses. The sanitation fund, it's still in here. It's almost gone. If we look at pages 67 through 69, you will see on page 67 that there is still $50,000 sitting there, as council decided a couple years ago. They had wanted to set aside about $50,000 for sanitation for any contingencies or anything that may come up. So there's still $50,000 cash in that fund. But as you'll see on page 68 for FY20, there's no activity, no revenues, no expenses in that fund. And that cash balance did not change over prior year. And that would, Brandon and I talked about that briefly. As far as how long this money needs to sit here is something I would recommend you and the town manager and the attorney discuss. But that's why you still have financial statements, because that money is still there. Okay, moving on to page 72. And 73 of the bound report, we've got the auditor's report on internal control over financial reporting and compliance and other matters. Because you are required to be audited in accordance with government auditing standards, you do have this additional report in the back. And we do not provide an opinion on internal controls, but we do, of course, look at your internal controls, and we do look at your compliance. And if anything comes to our attention, we want to bring it to your attention, and this is where we do that. So you will see that we had just a couple matters that we needed to address in the letter. One being a lack of separation of duties. Again, that's something we have each year, and we've talked about that in the past. It is a risk when you have a lack of separation of duties. And in your case, it is just because you have a limited size of accounting and administrative staff. It is very common. I will say that Sandy and her department and the town manager do try to put as many controls in place as they can through reviews and approvals and such to improve that. But anytime you have a small department, you're still going to have some risk there. So I would just recommend you just continue to evaluate that and see where you can strengthen controls. The other comment is basically a compliance finding that the confiscated assets special revenue fund, that's your narcotics fund, basically spent more money than was budgeted during the year, and that the Department of Audits uses 3%. So if you spend more than 3% over what was budgeted, we do have to include that in here. And that just requires a corrective action plan saying going forward, you'll look at those expenditures and consider if any amendments are necessary. And that's also a very common finding with governments. And one thing about that narcotics fund, it's had money sitting there for a while, and they've been able to spend it down some, and they probably were just able to spend more this year than they had planned. So the money was there, they just ended up spending more than was budgeted. But again, that required a corrective action plan to the state, and the corrective action was that management response listed that, going forward, they'll review budget to actual and amend as necessary. And I think this is the first time that has happened with that fund anyway. And again, like I said, it is common for that to happen. The next slide mentions a new standard that's coming up. We'll be working with Sandy to help the town implement GASB 84. And what that's going to do is change the way that your municipal court financial statements look. I don't usually go over the municipal court financial statements. It's basically just money in, money out, money held, and money due to others, but it is on page 70 and 71 in the bound report. GASB has just changed the model, the financial reporting model for that, so it's going to look different next year. It's not going to change the way court operates or anything, just the financial statements are going to look different, have some different verbiage. Coming up in a couple of years, GASB 87, this is a big one. This is leases. We've talked about it for a few years. It is of such magnitude, GASB extended it. Now they've extended it another year due to COVID. Basically, it is going to change the way that you may currently account for some operating leases, such as copiers and things like that. And we think this one is going to have a pretty broad effect on all of our governments. Now, your police vehicles that you currently lease, that's not changing. That's already a capital lease. Some of the terminology and the way it's presented on the financials will change, but we will be looking through with Sandy and her staff any leases that the town has and helping her decide how GASB 87 will impact those. Any questions?
Okay, we're good. Is that it?
That's it.
All right.
Okay.
I kept an eye on everybody, and there were just a few eyes closing, but not
I
everybody.
know. It's good stuff.
You did a good job.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And any questions, there's our contact information. This is a lot to jam into a small amount of time. So if you start looking at things or you remember something I said and you have a question, give me a call. We can always talk about it. And because sometimes those questions don't come up until you start looking in here. Now, what did she say about that building? Where's that number? And we can help you with that if you need us to later. So just reach out.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I want to thank you, and I want to also take this opportunity, since we don't get an opportunity to very often, thank Sandy for her hard work, and Bridget and Sierra, everybody that works on the financial side. We thank you. You do a great job of making sure our appropriation of funds is done efficiently and above board, and you're good at what you do, and we appreciate you. So let's give her a hand. All right. I want to ask Reverend James Vance to come forward for this next agenda item. Reverend Vance is your president now? Vance for 2 years now. Thank you for the work. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. Thank you. Yes. I just want to share with everyone, I'm not the president of the NAACP.
always share with everyone. I represent everyone. Thank you.
All right, we take our next agenda item. I will ask that this next agenda item, will this be tabled to March 4th or March 18th?
A fourth.
Okay. Are you sure you want to do that? Even though y'all do it without me?
Advertised for tonight's meeting and the next question, very good.
Yes. All right, we will go ahead and re-advertise it as long as you all have a quorum. So that's what I'm hesitating for. Good with that? All right. Okay. She will be your mayor for at least a couple of weeks.
Here now.
All right.
Mr. Mayor, when you say you're gonna
Oh,
move
we
this,
gotta-
we'll take a
We got to
motion
vote
table
on that.
for the date
Yes,
certain.
yes. I did not take a vote. Is there a motion to table that to the March 4th meeting?
So moved. Second.
A motion, second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Next item. Philip, you want to present this to us? These are public hearings too, correct?
Yeah, we've got two additional public hearings from Planning and Zoning tonight. The first one before you is a consideration of a petition from Living Proof Church to rezone the property at 414 Jenkins Road from educational institutional to downtown commercial, so from EI to C1. The applicant is Mr. Ernie Johnson, who's submitting this petition on behalf of Living Proof Church. The stated intent, Mr. Ernie is here if you have any questions, but the stated intent was to increase the flexibility of what can be done on the property, potentially for a future boarding facility, I think affiliated with Royal Animal Refuge. And staff does recommend approval of this request. There is listed in the staff report, and it was part of Planning Commission's recommendation. There is a small trailer that was located on just south of the property. If you can see here on your screen, that property just to the south is town-owned property. Mr. Johnson sent me some pictures this morning. That trailer has been removed. It was a recommendation of Planning Commission to approve the rezoning conditioned upon that trailer being moved off of the town's property, and it has. So just wanted to make clear that that item has been addressed. Compatibility with the future development map and comprehensive plan. The petition to C1 is consistent with the future development map and comp plan. The property lies within the town's commercial corridor character area, which does permit C1 zoning. The property is also located adjacent to other C1 zone properties. The fire station is zoned C1, which is directly next door. Impact assessment and compatibility with the zoning ordinance. Will the zoning permit suitable uses with surrounding properties? Yes, the uses allowed in C1 are compatible with the surrounding commercial properties. Any commercial uses requiring distancing or conditions due to proximity to school property will be held to those standards. Specifically, staff was keeping in mind the sale of alcohol. So the sale of alcohol is permitted in C1 district. Some uses are allowed to do that. It is next to Sandy Creek High School, so the town and the state minimum distancing requirements for that particular use will be held to if some kind of use like that were to happen in the future. So that was just why that was in there. Will the zoning adversely affect adjacent properties? No. It is staff's opinion that this rezoning will not increase the negative impact on surrounding properties. Does the property have reasonable economic use as currently zoned? The property does have some reasonable economic use as currently zoned, only if there is demand for educational or institutional development. Due to the zoning, if there is demand for other commercial uses present in the same character area, this property would be deprived economic use currently enjoyed by others in a similar situation. Would the proposed proposed rezoning result in a use which will or could be excessively burdensome on existing infrastructure. No, the intensity of C1 uses is compatible with the character area and existing infrastructure. Staff does recommend approval without any conditions.
Any questions for Philip before we move on with the public hearing?
Go over that alcohol part again, the sale of alcohol, and how far distance do they need?
Yeah, so the state's distancing requirement and subsequently the town's distancing requirement for alcohol sales or consumption or anything like that in schools, I believe is 600 feet as the crow flies. So not walking distance or anything like that. It would just be 600 feet. And if there was a use that were to go on this property that had alcohol sales as a part of the business or could be a part of the business, we would just we would make sure that that business held to those distancing requirements since it's next to the school. And it's from the property line of the school to the facility or the area in which alcohol would be consumed or sold.
Any other questions for Philip? All right, is there anyone here that would like to speak in support of this request? None? Is there anyone here who would like to speak in opposition to this request? None. Is there a motion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we approve the petition from Living Proof Church to rezone the property at 414 Jenkins Road from EI Educational Institutional to C1 Downtown Commercial.
For a second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we'll move on to our next item.
The next item is one that we brought before you in a workshop. We put before Planning Commission. Planning Commission recommended approval. It's consideration to approve ordinance number 2020-02, which would update the town's parking ordinance to add shared parking agreements and proximity to public parking reductions. So we did have this conversation about parking and the parking ordinance being an item of interest for the town, since we've been focusing on downtown development and ordinance revisions consistent with that. Many cities across Georgia and the rest of the country have been focusing on revising and updating their parking ordinance in order to facilitate economic development and different things in their downtown districts. As stated in the workshop, staff does recommend a two-phased kind of approach to tackling some of the parking ordinance in a more comprehensive manner. This is phase one, which is some quick fixes to allow for flexibility of property owners in how they are able to provide parking for their businesses or their properties. The second phase would be kind of a part of the Livable Centers initiative that we're getting into. So there would really be a deep dive into what are some good parking ordinance revisions that would really benefit the town and property owners in just a more comprehensive manner. So the two revisions that we have today, I'll just kind of go over. There were a couple of some minor revisions that were suggested. One is the elimination of this provision here that parking not be located within the front yard of any property in the O&I zoning district. Staff just took a look at this while we were kind of already in here tinkering, and noticed that in most O&I zoning districts currently, parking is in the front. So this provision didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. It would be better for us to kind of remove it now to fix a lot of non-conforming issues that are present across the town and to maybe readdress it in our comprehensive update if we really wanted to take a look at that. We do have design requirements, especially downtown, on where parking is to be located. And ideally, parking would be located in the rear of a building in a downtown environment. And I think that was probably the intent here for office and institutional. It just was never really executed. So we believed that eliminating this provision would just kind of free up a lot of non-conforming situations in town, and we could take a look at it later. The next section that we eliminated was this location provision. It requires that parking be located on the property. This is just, again, from a flexibility perspective, it doesn't allow property owners to utilize a property that may be next to them or purchase more property or have something maybe across the street as long as there's adequate means of getting pedestrians over there to be able to have parking for their facility off-site. It also doesn't allow for shared parking agreements or reductions utilizing public parking. So we eliminated that provision. Moving on to the shared parking arrangement, I'll just kind of do a quick overview of the highlights here. The reduction amount was listed as 20%. The off-site spaces, so the spaces that you would share would need to be within 1,000 feet of walking distance to the property. This number was gathered from a lot of research on some industry standards, if you will, walking distance requirements and reductions in distances. 1,000 feet seemed to be the threshold that people were kind of willing to walk, particularly in a downtown environment, to another business for parking. There's provision for not having the hours overlap. There must be at least the minimum required spaces of the largest individual use sharing the lot. The parking area must be owned by the owner of one of the uses or leased for at least a 20-year term through a permanent easement. This provision was put in to kind of protect the property owners. If one owner enters into an agreement with another for parking, they should be kind of guaranteed that ability to utilize that parking for a period of time. A legal easement seemed like the best way to do that. Staff had seen a lot of different arrangements in different cities. This seems to protect the property owner that's seeking this shared parking well. And it also provides for the shared parking agreement if a business cycles through. Not all businesses are around for 20 years. If a new business goes in and part of the value of that property was the fact that there was a shared parking agreement with somebody next door, they're still able to take advantage of that. So that's where that easement language came from. The next provision, number 5, changes shall not be made to the parking area, which would reduce the parking. That's just stating, this agreement and the town's approval of it was made at a particular point in time when a particular number of spaces were available, and just making sure that that's adhered to. Other kind of miscellaneous items, handicap spaces can't be shared, loading spaces can't be shared. Those are just particular to a type of business, and we kind of get in ADA requirements, so we don't want to mess with that. And then the last provision is, of course, any proposed change or use of a structure will have to then provide that adequate parking is available after that alteration is made. So still have to adhere to future parking ordinance requirements. Shared parking agreement doesn't give kind of carte blanche waiver to anybody who enters into them. And I know I just talked a lot, so are there any questions up until that point? I've only got one more little provision to go through.
Obviously, both parties or both parking lot businesses would have to come to their own agreement.
Correct.
We would, as a town, we don't get involved in that.
We would only get involved as far as approving that agreement as satisfying parking requirements of our ordinance. But we would not get involved in the agreement or the easement itself. That makes sense. And the last item here was the proximity to public parking. We have a lot of public parking downtown. I think as a part of the LCI, we're really talking about expanding it if we need to. We do have the land to be able to do that as a town. We've got new public parking, obviously, here at Town Hall. It's situated in downtown. The old police station has all of that parking now available to public parking, and 881 Sonoy Road, the old town hall, has all of that parking available as public parking. So there is a pretty substantial amount of public parking. We're going to be taking a look at providing wayfinding signage for residents and visitors to know where that public parking is. So if there's an area that's filled up, they know where to go to have more parking. And this is also a benefit to businesses. There is frequently a provision to reduce parking requirements in downtown areas if you are within a certain distance of public parking lots. We use the same 1,000-foot metric for that. And it's the same 20% reduction if you're within 1,000 feet of public parking. So that's it.
Anybody have any questions? Of one, well, two. Can you give me any example of a situation where loading spaces are shared and that would be a bad thing?
So it's really about a conflict of maybe delivery times. If you've got two restaurants next to each other and they're sharing a loading space and two deliveries are happening at the same time, particularly if it's if it's a tractor trailer that's making the delivery, you want to make sure that you're able to provide adequate parking for those maybe two conflicting businesses to have deliveries. So that's usually where that comes from. And, especially, that's kind of a lot more prevalent now because loading deliveries are made more frequently now with the pandemic and just a lot more online deliveries. So businesses, instead of going to the warehouse kind of comes to them. So having adequate delivery and loading spaces is important.
And my next question is a grammar question, number 6. Is it handicap or handicapped? Anybody? We got any English teachers in here? I don't want to act like one.
Kept space.
Counselor, it's on you. Is it handicap parking or handicapped parking? All right. Well, then we'll go with the way it reads. Right.
If you look at it handicap parking, then
Sounds like the parking
That sounds
space is
right.
handicapped.
And sometimes it is.
Handicapped sounds past tense.
All right.
handicap,
Thank you, sir.
like it is, you're good.
All right, good job, Mr. Phillip. Any other questions? All right. Let's see, we also have a public hearing on this, so is there anyone here that would like to speak in support of this change? Anyone here would like to speak in opposition to this change? All right. Hearing none, is there a motion?
I make a motion that we approve the new parking ordinances that Philip and staff have presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Any public comments about matters that do or do not appear on the agenda? Same rules apply. You have 3 minutes. Hearing none. Are there any staff comments? No staff comments. All right. Any council comments? Council comments. My understanding, there is a need for executive session. Is that correct, sir?
Item for threatened litigation.
Is there a motion to move to executive session?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We will be back soon.
Shortly.